What is Extensible Authentication Protocol? In the short video, I'm going to be discussing what this term actually means. So EAP is referring to a set of different authentication methods. But what EAP actually does is that it's not just one authentication method, it's several. But with EAP, you have integration with HTTP1X port security, and that's really, really important because we're using a three-party authentication system: supplicant, the end device authenticator, the EAP or the WLC, and an authentication server. The authentication server has to authenticate the supplicant before the supplicant can reach these other wireless clients. Now, let's look at the first method. Okay, so EAP is what we have is client. The client is supplying credentials to the AS. The client and the AS exchange challenge messages, okay, that are encrypted and returned, and we're using something called dynamic keys and to overcome the weaknesses of WEP. Now, let's look at EAP Fast. So EAP Fast uses something called a protected access credential. Okay, protected access credential is something we are using, the PAC. And the PAC, we have three phases. Okay, so we have phase 0, the PAC generated or provisioned and installed. And then we have phase 1, after the supplicant AS have authenticated each other, they form a TLS tunnel. And then the phase 2 is end user can be authenticated through the TLS tunnel for additional security. So very, very important here. We've got two different authentication processes here. Pre-TLS tunnel, you had authentication happening, and post-TLS tunnel establishment, you had authentication happening. Outer authentication, inner authentication. Okay, the Radius server, that has to generate one PAC per user. It's got a big responsibility here. Let's look at PEEP. So PEEP, we also have inner and outer authentication. Okay, you have the AS here, and that uses a certificate. Once that certificate is passed to the client, if it approves of it, a TLS tunnel is established. The client doesn't have to use doesn't use certificate at all here, okay? But it has to use MS Chat version 2 or GTC. Okay, it has to use one of these. Okay, and certificate that passes a public key used to decrypt messages from the certificate authority, the CA. Now, let's look at EAP TLS, which goes one step further than PEEP, because this requires a certificate on every client device. Every client device uses a certificate, and that means we need to use something called a PKI, public key infrastructure, in order to manage all of these certificates. We've got so many that we need to manage and also revoke once they're no longer required by the end user device. So that is the different EAP methods there discussed. Thank you for watching.